The roar was deafening, a physical blow, not thunder, but water. A monstrous, mud-brown serpent uncoiled, smashing through Havenwood, and in its churning maw, a splash of pink, a child, 7-year-old Lily Armitage, clinging by tiny, white-knuckled hands to a tree branch that threatened to snap with every monstrous surge. For volunteer firefighter Ethan Cole, watching from the collapsing bank, this wasn't just a rescue mission. This raging flood, it was a terrifying, living embodiment of a nightmare he'd carried for over 20 years, a personal demon made real. The choice he was about to make, the fight he was about to endure, wouldn't just test his limits, it would bring the entire town to its knees. Not in sorrow, but in a way no one could have ever predicted. Ethan Cole was a man built of the same sturdy, unassuming timber as the oldest oaks in Havenwood National Forest. His Havenwood hardware store, a local institution, was a sanctuary of order and dependability, smelling perpetually of fresh-cut lumber, oil, and the quiet promise of projects fulfilled. Customers came not just for nails or paint, but for Ethan's steady advice, his patient ear, the way he seemed to absorb a piece of their worries with every sale. He was known for his quiet generosity, a patched roof for the widowed down the street, an unnoticed discount on lumber for the church's new sign, always done without fanfare, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He was, in many ways, the unassuming bedrock of their small community. But beneath that calm, capable exterior, Ethan wrestled with a ghost. 20 years prior, a sun-drenched afternoon by Havenwood Creek, then a gentle, meandering stream, had fractured his world. His younger brother, Danny, just 8 years old, had slipped on a mossy rock. One moment, laughter echoed through the trees. The next, Danny was struggling, his small hand outstretched. And Ethan, a boy of 15 himself, had frozen, not from indifference, but from a sudden, paralyzing terror so profound it had rooted him to the spot, a spectator to his own life's greatest tragedy. The creek had claimed Danny, and in doing so, had implanted a shard of icy fear deep within Ethan's soul, a visceral, suffocating phobia of deep, fast-moving water. This profound, unshakable guilt, this constant, quiet ache of failure, was the paradoxical force that had driven him to join the Havenwood Volunteer Fire Department a decade ago. It wasn't for glory, nor the thrill some sought. It was a silent, desperate pilgrimage towards atonement, a yearning to become the protector he hadn't been for Danny. He excelled in training, his focus intense, his movements precise. He was reliable, strong, the first to volunteer for the toughest jobs. But water rescue calls, though, sent a current of pure dread through him, a cold reminder of his deepest vulnerability. His colleagues, men like Chief Miller, a man whose weathered face held both the sternness of command and the warmth of a father figure, recognized Ethan's quiet dedication, but perhaps also sensed a hidden battle raging within him whenever the river swelled or the rains came too hard. Havenwood itself was a postcard of rural American resilience, nestled in a valley where the creek, in kinder times, was a town's gentle pulse. American flags, crisp and bright, adorned many porches. Kids rode bikes down familiar streets, and the phrase "neighbor helping neighbor" was less a slogan and more a daily practice. But that October, the heavens unleashed a fury unlike any seen in generations. It began as a persistent, soaking rain on a Monday, turning lawns into sponges. By Tuesday, it was a determined drumming, the kind that hinted at nature's darker moods. Wednesday brought a deluge. Gutters overflowed, roads became shallow rivers, and the familiar, comforting murmur of Havenwood Creek began to deepen into an ominous growl. Ethan, watching from the steamy windows of his hardware store, felt an old, familiar anxiety begin to coil in his stomach. Radio broadcasts, initially cautious, escalated to urgent warnings. Flash floods imminent, the creek cresting, evacuations advised for low-lying areas. His firefighter's pager, clipped to his belt, started a sporadic chirping that soon became a near-constant demand. He locked up the store early, a grin set to his jaw, his mind already cataloging emergency protocols. He was at the fire station, a hive of focused activity, as volunteers checked and rechecked swift water gear, generators, and chainsaws, when the call crackled over the radio, sharp with static and raw panic. Dispatch to Havenwood Fire. Report a child swept into Havenwood Creek by the Miller Farm Bridge. Clinging to a tree, immediate assistance required. A sudden, deathly silence descended upon the station, broken only by the incessant drumming of rain on the tin roof. Havenwood Creek. A child. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face, his breath catching in his throat. The air turned cold, heavy. Chief Miller's voice, when he finally spoke, was tight, stripped of all but grim necessity. All right, people, you heard it. Swiftwater protocols. Peterson, Bailey, secure the Zodiac. Cole, with me on primary assessment. Let's go, go, go. The journey to the Miller Farm Bridge was a terrifying slalom through a world dissolving into water and chaos. Rain lashed the windshield of the fire truck, wipers fighting a losing battle. Familiar landmarks were submerged, roads transformed into treacherous currents. When they finally skidded to a halt near the bridge, or what was left of the approach, the scene was apocalyptic. Havenwood Creek was no longer a creek. It was a monstrous, boiling entity, a liquid battering ram of mud, uprooted trees, and mangled debris. It had ripped through the valley with savage force, its roar a primal scream. And there, caught in its terrifying heart, was a small, impossibly fragile figure of Lily Armitage. Her pink raincoat, a cruel speck of childhood innocence in the midst of adult-sized destruction, was the only thing that made her visible against the dark, thrashing water and the skeletal branches of the ancient willow she clung to. The tree itself was groaning, its roots exposed and undermined, dipping ever lower towards a furious torrent. On the bank, a scene of pure, distilled parental agony unfolded. Sarah Armitage was on her knees in the mud, her scream swallowed by the flood's roar, while her husband Tom was being physically restrained by two other men, his face a mask of white, silent horror, his eyes locked on his daughter. For Ethan, the scene was a direct, brutal punch to his soul. The roaring water, the small, imperiled figure, the sheer overwhelming force of nature. It was Danny's last moments, replayed in excruciating, high-definition terror. His hands clenched into fists, his breath sawed in his chest. A wave of nausea, cold and acidic, rose from his gut. This was his nightmare, his constant companion, given monstrous life. Around him, the other firefighters were shouting, assessing, their faces grim. The county specialized swiftwater team was en route, but they were facing the same flooded roads, at least an hour, maybe two, away. An eternity Lily didn't have. Chief Miller, his face etched with the impossible weight of command, turned to Ethan. He knew Ethan's story, the quiet burden he carried. This is beyond us, Ethan, Miller said, his voice strained, almost a whisper against the flood's roar. The current's too fast, too much debris. We might have to wait for county. Try to stabilize from the bank. It was an admission of helplessness that tore at them all. Ethan stared at Lily. Her face, when he could glimpse it, was a small, pale oval of terror. Her cries, if she was making any, were lost. He saw one of her little red boots, dangling precariously, then torn away by a surge, disappearing into brown chaos. He saw her knuckles, ghostly white against the dark bark, and in that instant something snapped. The fear was still there, a cold, constricting band around his chest, but a different emotion surged through him, hot and fierce, a defiant, protective rage. He thought of Danny, of the crushing weight of, if only. This time it would be different. This time he wouldn't be a spectator. This was more than a rescue. It was a chance, however slim, at redemption. He met Chief Miller's gaze, his own eyes reflecting the wildness of the scene, but also a new, steely resolve that seemed to burn away the shadows of his old fear. Chief, Ethan's voice was raspy, but it cut through the noise. I'm going. Get the lifeline. Now. A stunned silence. Then Chief Miller nodded, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even pride. in his tired eyes. "All right, Cole. Godspeed. Peterson, Bailey. Lifeline, double anchor to that big oak. Move like your lives depend on it. Because it does." The next few minutes were a maelstrom of controlled urgency. Ethan moved with a strange, detached calm, shedding his heavy turnout gear, his mind focusing on procedure, on the mechanics of the task, building a wall against the terror that threatened to engulf him. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, but his hands, as he checked the harness, were surprisingly steady. Fellow firefighters, their faces tight with concern, worked around him, their movements efficient, secure in the thick, bright orange rescue rope around his waist, its cold, reassuring weight a tangible link to the world he was about to leave. He pulled on a helmet, a buoyancy aid. He glanced at Lily, a small, desperate prayer forming in his mind. He caught Tom Armitage's eye, saw the silent, unbearable plea. Ethan gave a single, sharp nod. No words were needed. Chief Miller clasped his shoulder, his grip like iron. "We've got you, Ethan. Every step. Don't be reckless. Be smart. Be strong." Ethan took a deep, shuddering breath. The air tasted of mud, decay, and raw power. He moved to the edge of the crumbling bank, the ground beneath his boots soft, yielding. The water seethed below, a hungry, liquid beast. He could feel its cold breath, its irresistible pull. For a sliver of a second, Danny's face, small and terrified, flashed before his eyes. He squeezed them shut, banishing the image. Not now. Not ever again. Then he stepped into the flood. The impact was brutal. The water, far colder and more powerful than he'd even braced for, punched the air from his lungs. It was like being hit by a wall of liquid concrete. The current instantly grabbed him, a giant, invisible hand trying to wrench him off his feet, to drag him into the churning abyss. Mud and unseen debris swirled, stinging his face, filling his senses with the river's primal fury. The lifeline snapped taut, a sudden, violent jerk at his waist, a testament to force he was up against. On the bank, he knew Peterson and Bailey were already digging in, fighting to hold him. "Slack," he managed to yell, his voice swallowed almost immediately. "Give me some slack." He had to use the current, angle himself, not fight its full, terrify him head on. Each step was a monumental effort. His legs, already burning from the cold and exertion, were battered by submerged objects, jagged branches, twisted pieces of metal, things he couldn't identify but felt with jarring pain. The water was a relentless tormentor, pushing, pulling, trying to suck him under. He used his firefighter's pike pole, a last-minute decision, to probe the unseen riverbed, to find purchase, to brace against the violent surges. His muscles screamed, a chorus of agony. He could see Lily more clearly now, her wide, terrified eyes fixed on him like a drowning sailor spotting a distant light. He tried to shout something reassuring, but his own face was likely a grimace of pain and effort. "Hang on, Lily. I'm almost there," he bellowed, praying the wind would carry his words. The 50 or 60 feet to the willow tree felt like an impossible, endless mile. The river seemed to invent new ways to thwart him. A section of collapsed fence, hidden beneath the brown torrent, snagged his ankle, its barbed wire tearing through his trousers and into his flesh. He cried out, stumbling, dropping to one knee as the water surged over his shoulders, trying to claim him. For one horrifying, suspended moment, he lost all footing, the lifeline the only thing anchoring him to existence. He heard frantic shouts from the bank, saw figures straining against the rope. The old, familiar panic, cold and suffocating, rose like bile in his throat. The panic that had frozen him by the creek 20 years ago. He fought it down, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. He focused on the feel of the rope, the strain in his arms, the image of Lily. He had to keep going. For her. For Danny. For the man he needed to be. With a guttural roar of effort, he forced himself back to his feet, his legs trembling violently. The water was an intelligent, malevolent force. He was sure of it. The willow tree was closer, agonizingly so, but it looked even more unstable, the water gnawing at its base, the branches dipping so low Lily was now being slapped by waves. Her grip looked terrifyingly fragile. And then he saw it, a monstrous swell, a sudden, dark wall of water, taller than he was, surging upstream, likely caused by a log jam giving way further upriver. It moved with terrifying speed, a liquid battering ram aimed directly at him and at Lily. There was no time to brace, no time to even yell a warning. The world dissolved into a violent, roaring brown and black hell. He was picked up, slammed, and tumbled end over end, the lifeline of cruel, cutting pressure around his waist. Water, thick with silt, forced its way down his throat, up his nose, into his eyes. He was drowning, blind, disoriented. His helmet was nearly ripped away. The pike pole was gone, snatched by the current. Utter, primal terror flooded him. This was it. This was how Danny felt. His lungs burned, desperate for air. Blackness pricked at the edges of his vision. Then, miraculously, his head broke the surface. He gasped, choked, vomiting muddy water. His body a wreck of shivering, battered flesh. The wave had passed, but it had driven him downstream, further from Lily, deeper into the river's enraged heart. He'd lost precious, irreplaceable ground. On the bank, a collective cry of horror had erupted. Sarah Armitage collapsed, her face buried in her hands. Chief Miller, his knuckles white on his radio, barked orders. Hold him! Damn it, hold that line. Don't you let him go. Peterson and Bailey were leaning back at almost a 45-degree angle, their boots gouging trenches in the mud, the rope creaking ominously. Ethan, gasping and disoriented, fought to clear his head. The river's foul taste coated his mouth. Every muscle screamed. His body begged him to give up, to signal defeat, to let them pull him back to the fragile safety of the bank. The voice of his old fear whispered insidious comforts. It's too much. You can't do this. You'll die too. But then, through the spray and the chaos, he saw Lily. The wave had savaged her perch. The branch was now almost fully submerged. She was limp, her head lolling, her face inches from the churning water. Her eyes were closed. She was fading, and in that instant, something hotter than fear, stronger than despair, ignited within Ethan, a white-hot furnace of pure, unadulterated rage. Rage at the river, rage at his own fear, rage at the thought of failing again. Not again. Not this child. He locked his eyes on Lily's small, still form. He would reach her, or he would die trying. The ghost of Danny was no longer a tormentor, but a silent, urging presence beside him. He began to move, not with the calculated effort before, but with a raw, desperate fury. He no longer felt the cold, or the 1,000 cuts and bruises. There was only Lily and the burning, all-consuming need. The river threw everything it had at him. A massive, splintered tree trunk, like a runaway battering ram, spun towards him. He twisted, a fraction of a second before impact, the log smashing into his left shoulder with a sickening crack of sound and a blinding flash of pain. Agony seared through him, but he gritted his teeth, pushing on, his left arm now a fiery, useless weight. Closer, closer. He could see the individual strands of her wet hair plastered to her forehead. He could see the blue tinge to her lips. Her eyes flickered open, unfocused, then found his. And in their depths he saw not just terror, but a tiny, almost extinguished spark of hope. It was enough. He was a few feet away, a chasm in this maelstrom. The water around the tree was a hungry whirlpool. He lunged, his right arm outstretched, fingers straining. Missed. The current dragged him back. No. The word was torn from him, a raw, animal sound. He lunged again, using his legs to somehow propel himself against the torrent, ignoring the screaming pain in his shoulder. His fingers brushed her cold, wet sleeve, slipped, then with a final desperate surge, his hand closed around her small, thin arm. He had her. The relief was a physical shock, almost buckling his knees. But there was no time. The river was still trying to tear her from him. "Lily, hold on to me. Squeeze tight," he yelled, his voice cracking. He pulled her towards him, her small body terrifyingly limp, a dead weight against his own exhausted frame. With his good hand, he fumbled for the safety strap clipped to his harness. His fingers were numb, clumsy, shaking violently, but somehow he managed to loop the strap around her small torso and clip it securely. They were one. The journey back was a fresh nightmare. He turned his body to shield Lily, taking the full force of the current, the debris, the biting cold. Each impact on his already battered body sent jolts of agony through him, but he barely registered it. His focus was singular. Keep Lily's head above water, move toward the bank. He could feel her small, cold body press against his, her shallow, ragged breasts against his neck. He wasn't sure if she was conscious. His foot slipped on a slime-covered rock. They went under, both of them, into the suffocating brown. Lily thrashed weakly against him as they resurfaced, sputtering, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of terror. Ethan held her tighter, his lips near her ear, murmuring, "Almost there, sweetheart. I've got you. We're almost there. Just hold on." He was operating on something beyond adrenaline now, some primal reserve of will. His vision tunneled, blackness creeping in at the edges. His good arm was a leaden weight. His legs moved as if through setting concrete. The bank, with its frantic, praying figures, seemed to recede with every agonizing step. He could see Chief Miller, Peterson, and Bailey, hauling on the rope with desperate, synchronized pulls, their faces masks of terrible strain and dawning hope. He saw Sarah Armitage on her knees, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, her lips moving in silent prayer. Tom stood beside her, rigid, tears streaming unheeded down his face. Then, just as he felt the last vestiges of his strength unraveling, as the darkness threatened to finally claim him, his boot hit something solid. Not mud, not shifting gravel. Firm earth, the shallows. He stumbled, lurched forward, half carrying, half dragging Lily, the water level dropping from his chest, to his waist, to his knees. Hands, so many hands, reached for them, pulling, supporting. Chief Miller's face was the first he saw clearly, streaked with mud and tears, his voice hoarse. "You got her, Ethan. You magnificent bastard, you got her." Ethan collapsed onto the muddy bank, onto his hands and knees, Lily still cradled against him. He was shaking so violently his teeth chattered. Air rasped in and out of his lungs in great, shuddering gasps. He gently, carefully, unclipped Lily from his harness, his fingers barely obeying him. Sarah and Tom Armitage were there, falling into mud beside them, their earlier cries of terror now transformed into choked, ragged sobs of indescribable relief. Sarah gathered Lily into her arms, rocking her, kissing her mud-streaked face, murmuring her name, a litany of love and gratitude. Tom's hand, trembling uncontrollably, reached out to smooth Lily's wet hair, his strong shoulders shaking with the force of his emotion. Paramedics, who fought their own battle against the flooded roads who arrived moments before, were suddenly there, their movements calm and efficient amidst the emotional storm. They gently took Lily, wrapping her in thermal blankets, checking her vital signs, their voices a soothing balm. Another paramedic was kneeling by Ethan, shining a light in his eyes, asking questions he couldn't quite process. The crowd of Havenwood townspeople, who had gathered on the slightly higher ground of the road, watching in stunned, horrified silence for what felt like an eternity, finally broke. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar, a wave of collective emotion. Cheers, shouts, sobs of relief. It was the sound of a town witnessing not just a rescue, but a miracle. It was the sound of community brought to its knees, not in despair, but in profound, overwhelming awe and gratitude for the courage they had just witnessed. Chief Miller knelt beside Ethan, his big, callous hand on Ethan's shuddering back. "You did it, son," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "You actually did it." Ethan looked up, his vision slowly clearing. He saw Lily swaddled in blankets, being carefully lifted onto a gurney. Her eyes, just narrow slits beneath swollen lids, found his. She was too weak to speak, too weak to even lift a hand. But for a fleeting second, her gaze held his, and he saw understanding, gratitude, and then the tiniest, almost imperceptible nod. In that instant, the 20-year-old sharp ice around Ethan's heart didn't just thaw. It shattered. The haunting image of Danny, frozen in his mind, was suddenly overlaid with this new one. Lily, safe. A profound, unexpected wave of peace, as powerful and overwhelming as the floodwaters had been, washed through him. He couldn't speak. He simply nodded back, a single, slow movement, before the exhaustion finally claimed him, and he sagged forward, supported by the chief. The days that followed saw Havenwood Creek retreat, leaving a landscape of mud, debris, and heartbreak, but also a renewed sense of community. Lily Armitage, after a short hospital stay for hypothermia and observation, was back home, a little quieter, a little thinner, but very much alive. Ethan, treated for hypothermia, exhaustion, a dislocated shoulder, and numerous cuts and bruises, found himself a reluctant town hero. He deflected praise, always crediting the team, the lifeline, the training. But Havenwood knew. They'd seen. A week later, at a hastily organized town gathering in the still damp community hall, Mayor Thompson spoke of courage, of sacrifice, of the spirit that defined Havenwood. Lily, holding her father's hand and clutching a slightly crumpled drawing of a smiling firefighter beside a huge red heart, walked shyly up to Ethan. "Thank you, Mr. Cole," she whispered, her voice small but clear as a bell. "Thank you for pulling me out of the scary water." Ethan Cole went back to Havenwood Hardware. The bell above the door still jingled its welcome. He still measured twice and cut once. But something had changed. The nightmares of Danny, the ones that stalked his sleep for 2 decades, began to recede, their sharp edges blunted by the memory of Lily's small, trusting weight in his arms. The creek, his lifelong symbol of failure and fear, was now also a symbol of something else. Something akin to peace. He had walked into the heart of his deepest terror, and not only had he survived, but he had brought someone back with him. He never sought the title of hero. In his mind, he was just a man who, when the moment came, found the strength to do what was right, what was necessary. But for the people of Havenwood, Ethan Cole became a living legend, a reminder that true heroism isn't about being fearless, but about acting despite fear. His incredible act of bravery didn't just save a little girl. It healed a man, it uplifted a town, and it shone a brilliant light on the enduring power of the American spirit, that quiet, resilient courage that steps into the flood, not for glory, but because someone needs saving, and because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes that is more than enough to bring a whole town to its knees in prayer, in thanks, and in awe.